Hello, my name is Mark Stoner, CEO and co-founder of Dry Powder Bio. We're here today to talk about cancer updates, what's going on with the market, and investing in cancer for potential investors. We have Dr. Robyn Leary. She's managing partner of Stentorian Ventures. Robyn's a thought leader in the field of cancer and is the founder of a VC firm that backs cancer-focused startups. Also, we have Ashley Miller, licensed certified genetic counselor, specifically in cancer. She has a background focus in cancer genetics and prevention programs. And Dr. Prentice Tom, Harvard Med School graduate, keynote speaker in healthcare, and has held many senior executive roles. He is also an advisor for Dry Powder Bio. Dry Powder Bio, we are a biotech marketplace connecting company founders with investors, with patient advocacy groups, university tech transfer offices, other investors internationally. And we're in the process of developing a strategy to introduce digital asset tokens or security tokens as a new possible way to fund early stage research and biotech companies specifically. My sister had cancer and passed away in January. I'd had it a few years ago. It affects a huge percentage of the population. And from what I understand with Robyn and Ashley and Prentice and just general knowledge, there's huge advances right now within the field. So we're focused really just general information about cancer, but also specifically investing in cancer. So Robyn, why don't you introduce what you're working on and start us off?
Yeah, my name's Robyn Leary. I'm a scientist by training, and I'm the managing partner of Stentorian Ventures. That is a venture capital firm that backs oncology-focused startups. I have always been really interested in cancer. I grew up in a community that was basically contaminated with radioactive waste. And I did see people become sick from cancer, including my parents. That really motivated me to spend my entire career in cancer research, basic research, translational medicine. And I've also worked on every phase of drug development for cancer therapeutics and also devices. I received my PhD from the University of Minnesota, did a postdoc at Scripps Research here in San Diego, and then I was a fellow of the National Institute of Health, the Cancer Therapeutics Training Program that was based out of Moore's Cancer Center at University of California, San Diego. I've worked in big pharma as well as small biotech, and I'm an active angel investor with what was formerly Tech Coast Angels, now the New Fund Venture Group.
All right, and Ashley, want to introduce your background, what you do?
Yeah, sure. I was trained at University of Utah, so I spent some time at Huntsman Cancer Institute, and then I came back home to California, spent some time at Stanford, and then transferred over to UCSF, and I've been here for a little bit over 3 years, and I work specifically in the cancer genetics and prevention program. So I see patients with cancer or family history of cancer in genetics.
All right, and Prentice, you want to kick us off with questions or kind of where we go from here?
Yeah, Mark, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to learn from Ashley and Robyn. Cancer is such a hot topic right now. It's there's certainly increasing risk across the spectrum of cancers, but there's a lot of hope I think on the horizon with a lot of the new therapies and treatments that are coming out. So my first question actually is for Ashley. Ashley, given the increasing risk or increasing prevalence of cancer, do you think, is that primarily due to environmental changes, genetic changes, or just the population living to an older age? What are the main contributors that are resulting in the increasing prevalence and risk for cancer in our population?
Thank you, Prentice. Yeah, I feel that question is a question we all think about and hope to know the answer of someday. I don't think there's a straightforward answer at this time. From what I talk to with my patients, I say all of the above are possibilities. I think that we do see there is a higher increase of certain cancer types in the US over other countries, and that makes us lean towards maybe something going on in the food here or the water here, our environment. But other than that, we also see the age that people are living to is increasing overall. And so cancer, the rate of cancer increases as you age. So you see there are multiple factors coming into play. And in addition to that, we're getting better at diagnosing cancer. People are coming into the doctors, we're able to figure out what type of cancer they have. If we know what type of cancer they have, we can better identify if there's a genetic cause that is affecting their cancer, rather than someone coming in with metastatic disease, not knowing where the cancer started, and therefore unable to figure out if they are a candidate for genetic testing.
So let me ask a follow-up to that, Ashley. Is some of the increased risk or increased rate of cancers just due to better screening, do you think? And so that we're just detecting more people that have cancer, whereas previously we just said they maybe died of natural causes?
I think that for some cancer types, that is true. One that comes to my mind is kidney cancer. I see patients who have ended up in a car accident or a bike accident. They got abdominal imaging. They found out they had a kidney cancer and it was incidental. They were asymptomatic. I also have patients that have pancreatic cancer, and in the past, they would have opened them up, said, we see cancer everywhere, we're sewing you back up, we're not going to investigate this. Similarly with ovarian cancer as well. But now they're able to figure out where that primary cancer started. So in that case, I don't think that it would have gone undiagnosed because those patients are symptomatic.
Oh, great. And Robyn, it seems like we're definitely getting better at treating a lot of cancers, and that the life expectancy from especially childhood cancers, but for a large variety of them, it seems like we're starting to see people live significantly longer with cancer. What are the general types of technologies and changes that have been occurring that are allowing for that?
Well, I think it started as early back as in 2000 when we had the first draft of the human genome. And that was around the time where we were getting these targeted therapies. So once we were able to read the genes in the genome and understand where those mutations were occurring, we made targeted therapies. So we were able to make drugs that target these specific mutations or these aberrant proteins that were causing the cancer. And so what we've seen is like very early on in cancer treatment, we had the traditional chemotherapies, and they were just basically attacking any kind of cell that was dividing. But nowadays we can go after the exact protein that was mutated and get rid of those cells expressing that protein. So it's more targeted. Usually we hope that the side effects or adverse events associated with the drugs are less, so people can tolerate the treatments better. And there is a little bit of data out there now suggesting that these targeted therapies do lead to increased lifespans. And not only targeted therapies, but we now have immunotherapies. There's just our understanding of cancer is so much deeper now that we can really go at the hallmarks of cancer and create drugs to like what are the molecular and cellular underpinnings of cancer.
How is artificial intelligence, machine learning, just the ability to manage so much more data, how has that affected curing cancer?
That's actually a really interesting question. So in 2019, the first guidance was put out by the FDA, and that was how do we integrate machine learning and AI in the approval of software or medical devices. And most of these devices are in the space of radiology, and so many of them are also cancer focused. So these are tools that are better at doing, for example, like looking at pathology slides and determining, out of hundreds of cross sections, that one spot that the radiologist or pathologist needs to look at in more detail. So we really are basically able, like it's more refined how we try to do the diagnostics.
Now, it seems like I'm in the Bay Area in California, and it seems like there's just dozens and dozens of new biopharma companies that are focusing on cancer therapies. Why is that? Why are there so many new companies coming out right now? And why instead of just Johnson and Johnson or Roche or the big players, it seems like the whole industry is changing in terms of how these new drugs are being discovered?
Well, back, over a decade or so, it was more common that big pharma would have an R&D component in the pharmaceutical company, and they would be testing all of these different therapies out like in basic research, translational medicine, in the early phase 1 trials. But nowadays, it's more mergers and acquisitions based. And so a biotech company will form, and then if it's doing well, it's acquired by a large pharmaceutical company, typically, around the phase 2 or phase 3 trials. But I would say in terms of like the increase simply in more of these companies, the government has put in a ton of investment in cancer research. So for example, initiatives like the Cancer Moonshot or just the NCI budget, so the National Cancer Institute, the budget is really big. It's actually the largest among these agencies. And so that's really basically what is spurring innovation, collaboration between the government, academia, and then biotech. So this really fostered collaboration and led to more companies being formed. And we do have a very large number of SBIR and STTR grants, and those fund these biotech companies. And our government has heavily invested in cancer specifically.
So Ashley, I have a question for you also, that if all these companies are coming out with all these new therapies and you're involved with counseling and working with patients and their families, how do you keep track? Because it must be impacting their survival rates and creating new optimism. But there's so many different medications coming out for so many different types of cancer. How do you keep track of that and let the patients know what their chances of survival and what the new drugs and therapies are for them?
Number one, continuing education units. We are always involved in conferences. We're in tumor boards. We work with our oncologists very closely. I would say that a major helpful resource for us is NCCN, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network. We refer to that a lot. And also, thankfully, I focus more on the genetic testing side of things and leave the treatment part up to the oncologist. I do write in my note if it is one of the main genes like BRCA1 or 2 or Lynch syndrome, where we've known that there are targeted therapies. We will actually mention that in our note, but we say, speak with your oncologist about this further. For other genes at this point in time, I can't think of specific targeted therapies for cancer. Those two really are the biggest ones. There are a few other genes in like ATM, CHEK2, PALB2 that also have therapies. But for the most part, a lot of the genes on our tests, unfortunately, don't have targeted therapies at this time. And I think that's hopefully going to change as we move forward.
Robyn, so what are some of the hot areas right now in terms of cancer therapies? Where would you expect to see a lot of new advances in the next 3 to 5 years?
Perhaps it would be metabolic reprogramming. So that's one of these areas we're understanding better, is how these cancer cells change their metabolism, and we're understanding ways that we could target it. And then I think I have seen also some basic research looking at, for example, the microbiome. Like, we're really understanding more about how that affects the cancer. So hopefully these are things that we can also modulate in the future.
And are there some particular companies that are coming out with new therapies that you think are particularly promising?
Well, I would say from the investor standpoint, whenever you see a platform technology, meaning that it could be used in many different cancer types or even across diseases, those are particularly interesting. So these might be, I could think of one company in my portfolio, and they're making vaccines more effective, and that is through metabolic reprogramming. That's a hot area right now. So I think that's the thing, is like, people say that drug development is usually a very risky area to invest in, but with platform technologies, it has the ability to possibly work in multiple therapeutic indications. And sometimes that can also be leveraged for B2B business. So if you have a platform, there might be other small biotechs or pharmaceutical companies who have an interest in understanding how they could leverage that platform and then actually bring in revenue to that small startup.
Robyn, that kind of brings up the question about investing in this area. So I think a lot of people think about the government, the NIH, Cancer Institute, and so forth. But for an individual investor or a VC firm, somebody investing with you, what kind of a return would they expect? Is this 10 years, 3 years, 5 years? It's the acquisition that you're going for, the M&A, or how would an investor look at kind of getting a return on their investment?
Yeah, I mean, those are always great questions, like how do you exit? How's the company plan on exiting? And then how long would it take? Traditionally, we thought about drug development that was, a 10 to 15 year from start, first patient in to finish. And now that those timelines have been dramatically accelerated, we have breakthrough designations and cancer therapies are being approved earlier. And then you can also invest in other areas, for example, medical devices or digital health technologies, and those don't take as long to develop. And then just basically, if one wanted to understand more about venture capital, those investments do tend to be terms of 10 years with holding periods usually ranging from 5 to 7 years where one is invested in that particular fund. So it's really going to differ from fund to fund, and one would have to follow up with that individual investment.
Do you see
Actually,
investor?
Mark,
Yeah, go
that
ahead. Brendan.
actually brings up a question that I have also. As an investor, could you, and someone who is very interested in investing in cancer therapies, there's so much potential and there's so much good that comes out of that. Can you
Yeah.
provide sort of a framework as how I would go about selecting the types of companies that would make sense to invest in?
Well, I think that as a private individual, that's actually quite challenging. And so nowadays, these startup companies, they want what they refer to as a strategic investor, or called smart money. And so these are people who tend to have operational backgrounds in drug development or device development. They're thought leaders in a certain area. Because investing in biotech is so competitive, just like the average Joe off the street probably wouldn't have access to these types of deals. Sometimes if you're a part of an angel investing group where they do have like a life science branch, those investors may get access, but yeah, usually venture capital, it does tend to be larger check sizes. So it really depends on what size check could the investor write. And then as an individual or as a group, are they a smart investor? Like what value do they add? Because oftentimes investors take seats on corporate boards and they help dictate scientific and medical strategy. And so typically, like if you want to invest, it's either through being part of an angel investing group or one would invest in a venture capital fund.
Okay, thank you. Mark, and you were going to say something when I interrupted you and asked Robyn a question.
No, I just was, from an investor perspective, so many people are affected by it personally or their family members or whatever. Do you see people interested in investing in certain areas? Like I know a family office in Houston that's focused only on pancreatic cancer and lung cancer, or are investors more broadly interested or just personal choice?
I don't know any data specifically about investors wanting to invest in cancer per se. And from what I know about family offices, I mean, like a lot of times I do know sometimes there are specific areas they invest in, but a lot of the, I would say like disease specific types of investing, it's actually more in the space of philanthropy. So a lot of times foundations, but venture capital also, there is the concept of impact investing where like when one donates to a foundation, that's like a charitable contribution. They're not expecting money back. Whereas impact investing in venture capital, one would hope for returns and hope for the ability to then reinvest and help grow these companies. So they're maybe investing in at one stage and then hoping to see that as they go to their next round for investment, that they're able to put that money back in and be with that company as it grows and pumps out new technologies or new drugs, new devices.
Did you want to show us some of your PowerPoint slides?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me share my screen.
Just as a thought leader, we were speaking about it before, and just a little bit more background, also kind of maybe what the government is doing. There we go, stats. And
yeah. So I did think like the types of questions I get asked as just somebody who's spent their career in cancer, and try to put this in perspective for individuals who aren't as well versed in the area of cancer or oncology. So in the US, cancer is among one of the leading causes of death. And we know that certain populations are at increased risk of cancer. About 40% of individuals in the US are going to be diagnosed with cancer during their lifetimes, and that translates to about 2 million new cases in 2022. And unfortunately, within the next couple of decades, with our aging population, this is likely to double. Currently, with our current state of treatments and preventative measures, about 30% who are diagnosed do not make it past 5 years past their diagnosis. And the cost of care in the US healthcare system is tremendous. In 2020, it was over $200 billion. And the pain of loss that those who've either experienced cancer or a loved one who's had cancer, it's really immeasurable. And then another top question that I get asked is, what is cancer? So there are two famous cancer biologists out there, Robert Weinberg and Douglas Hanahan. And so one at MIT, one at UCSF. And as early back as in 2000, they wrote the first paper, and they coined this as, what are the hallmarks of cancer? So basically, like, what happens to a normal cell as it transitions into a cancer cell? And this, over the past 20 years or so, this has gotten richer, but now we've got about 10 characteristics that can be described in these cells. So if you're looking up at that green box with the arrow, we know that sustaining proliferative signaling is one of these hallmarks of cancer. So you can think of it as, this would be the gas pedal. The cells continue to divide and grow, even though the signal is no longer there. And then next to that brown box is the evading of growth suppressors. So the opposite of the gas pedal is the brake pedal. In these cells, they no longer have functional brakes. So these suppressors are on in the cells, but they're just ignoring them, and they keep on driving on and growing and dividing. That pink icon there, that's supposed to be an immune cell. We now know that cancer cells are incredibly savvy in avoiding the immune system, so these immune cells cannot target them and destroy them. And beneath that is enabling replicative immortality. So programmed inside of every cell is a certain number of times that it's supposed to divide, so basically replicate, but cancer cells, they've lost that signal. Even when they're supposed to die, they just continue to divide and replicate. Beneath that, you see a flame that's associated with inflammation. Tumors love inflammation, and that's these inflammation signals are being pumped up in cancer cells. And that black icon there, that is representing invasion and metastases. So these cells, maybe they're clumped together in a tumor, what they start doing is invading surrounding tissues. And then sometimes they even break free and circulate through the body and then form tumors at new distant sites. So that's a metastatic cancer. And then what is next to that in red, that's supposed to be blood vessels. So we know that when a cell becomes a cancer cell, it often has the ability to induce blood vessels to grow towards it. And so, or it's penetrating into blood vessels, and so that it has basically nutrients are coming to the tumor, or more oxygen. So it's basically feeding itself so it can grow and divide faster and faster. That dark blue picture of a broken genome, what is that? So that's symbolic of, we know that cancer is a genetic disease and that certain genes get mutated. And there are also, so in some cancers, hallmarks of instability, meaning that lots of mutations occur throughout the genome, that the sequence just, over time, its integrity is lost. That above it in gray is a cross that is resisting cell death or apoptosis. Every cell has this program in it, and when that program's turned on, it means the cell is supposed to die. Maybe it's undergone a lot of damage, and if it was to divide, it would be a damaged cell, and it wouldn't be good to have that there any longer. But these cells, no matter how much damage they have, they just continue to divide. Above that is deregulating cellular metabolism. So we know that cells need a lot of energy, and these cells are particularly good at using novel metabolic pathways in order to feed themselves so they can continue to replicate. And so this is what Weinberg and Hanahan have today described as the hallmarks of cancer. This is what we know today. And just like it has over the past 20 years, I'm sure we will continue to learn more.
My sister had a P10 mutation. She had 5 different types of cancer since she was 31. So it was just bad luck, bad health. Not sure, but it just, she'd get better, then something else would come up and thought she escaped it, whatever. How does the genetics come into that?
Yeah, I can jump in and speak to that one. So there are certain genes that when you inherit a mutation from your mother or father, or occasionally it happens after conception, it causes an increased risk of cancer in certain organs in your body. So it's not typically every organ in your body, but it targets specific organs, generally because that's where the protein or gene is active. So when it's not working or not activated, there are no longer these controls that you see here on the slide. You're no longer having controlled cell death. The cells can just grow out of control without any checkpoint. So the reason that we see certain cancer types is typically because that's where the gene is most important. And so, you know, you do have one functional copy from your other parent, but oftentimes that's not enough.
No, interesting to hear just the background and you know why someone would get something like that. So yeah, Robyn, go ahead.
Let's see what else I got for you guys. Yeah, so if we look at the marketplace, the market opportunity for biotech, what we've seen for these early stage companies over the past couple of years is really interesting in the oncology space. Even though COVID was ongoing and infectious disease was a really interesting area to invest in, actually a top area for investment was oncology. And if you look from 2019 to 2021, in terms of number of deals and the amount of money that went into these seed or Series A companies, that doubled in both cases. And we're also, as I had mentioned, and we had discussed about artificial intelligence and machine learning for medical devices and medical software. That's becoming really interesting too for the market. As I had mentioned, back in 2019 and now in 2021, we're starting to put together a guidance by the FDA, and that is for machine learning and AI being introduced into software. And so we're starting to see the number of these devices that integrate AI or machine learning also growing. So more and more of these devices are coming out there, and we expect that those numbers will increase because this guidance now is becoming more and more expansive. I did want to touch upon all of the government initiatives in the area of cancer. I mean, this could be a very lengthy talk on its own, but so just kind of to introduce this, there's something that's often referred to as the triple helix, and that's basically the intersection between government, academia, and industry. So we know the government, for example, the NIH or the National Cancer Institute, from taxpayer money, they fund a lot of these basic research programs, but also translational programs, so the bench to bedside kind of research. And then also they fund government grants for industry. So that would be like SBIR or STTR grants. So those are for these early stage biotech companies. And so there is this, like this biotech innovation does rely on the collaboration between these different sectors.
And just, I could comment on that. So I went to the autumn conference in New Orleans in February. It's the University Technology Transfer Association, mostly university people there, but also industry. And then, you know, it's been done that way for a long time. It's just things move so slow, getting approvals, the legal process, faculty get frustrated, kind of getting it approved to go through the system. And then for the tech transfer offices at universities, they have smaller budgets, especially kind of there's the R1 schools and then the rest of the schools, you know, and it's hard for those offices to be experts in so many different areas, from software to biotech and medicine. And then for industry, I saw kind of in conversations that, they basically say we work in diabetes or what the areas they're interested in. And then universities go to them when they have something, and then kind of work through from there. But that was one of the discussions we had. What Dry Powder Bio is focused on is rare diseases, kind of these areas that we can accelerate using digital asset tokens. So, for example, Novartis was at the conference. They're interested in neglected diseases, tropical diseases, rare diseases. That's a good opportunity for digital asset tokens where they can accelerate that. And it's much more economical for a smaller patient group to work through. So, sorry, just kind of comments there.
I mean, there's definitely a need for further collaboration. It's not like in academia that we're seeing tons of drugs coming out of the university alone. There needs to be collaboration with industry. Often that's where a lot of expertise also lies within industry. But I think what is promising is that there's been a tremendous amount of money being put towards cancer from the government. And so, for example, back in 2016, we saw the Cancer Moonshot program that was launched, that initiative. And one of the big questions was like, why were they doing it now? And they stated that there is just all this new scientific understanding and vast amounts of data just waiting to be transformed into solutions. And that we have right now immense scientific and technological capabilities that are really positioning us for a quantum leap in the treatment of cancer. And that really amongst the American people, so many of us have been affected by cancer, and this is a shared national commitment. It's time to harness the intellectual creativity. And so they were really pushing as early back as 2016 in this model where they wanted to see more collaboration between government, academia, the private sector, and then healthcare providers. And what we see with this is that when you look at funding for cancer research, whether it be basic research or translational medicine, or even these grants that go to these early stage companies, the most money, despite there being a pandemic recently, the most money is being spent on cancer. If you look at the budget of the NCI, that's the National Cancer Institute, it's the top funded agency. And then also when you look at the number of active projects that are being funded, the National Cancer Institute has the top number of active projects. And this is, some pretty new news, so maybe not all of us are familiar with this new agency, but so this is actually back in, when was it? I believe March is when it got finally approved, is the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, ARPA-H, it's often referred to as. And so there has been recently $1 billion put in to establish a new agency. And the purpose is to foster public and private collaborations. And this is modeled off of something that we've already done before, DARPA. So that was this secretive military branch of the government, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And out of that came the technologies like internet and GPS that are so familiar to us today. And so this new agency, ARPA-H, is mimicked off of what was done, from the 60s with DARPA. And this is really like the goal here is that the US be on the forefront of innovations that prevent, treat, and cure disease. And really the poster child for this agency is cancer. Their goal is that they want to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years. And they really want to see more cancers that were once death sentences now turn into treatable diseases. So like personally, I think that's really inspiring. And I just believe that we're going to see more and more companies spinning out of this because of this, really the government prioritizing and incentivizing these collaborations.
And I'm assuming 95% of the companies are being acquired or licensed as opposed to IPOs, or what's the ratio?
Well, whether a company goes public through IPO or where there's a merger or acquisition, that can be dependent sometimes on just how the market's doing or the biotech valuation. So I guess the trend that I've seen is that as valuations of companies are lower, there's an increased incentive to, and in an earlier stage, like license their technology or undergo an acquisition from pharma. So it's kind of hard to predict. And I mean, we really are in a new era after the pandemic. So like an exit could be anything from licensing and technology to being acquired by a major pharmaceutical company to going public through IPO. And then
And as we
also like that's like an alternative route.
And as we kind of start to summarize here and close out, realistically, is there a cure for cancer potentially in 10 years, 20 years, or is it going to be pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, one by one, or how would that potentially happen? What's a realistic timeline? I know that's hard to predict the future, but.
Well, there's definitely the hope that there's going to be more and more cures. Cancer is incredibly diverse. And so in some areas, we'll surely see more happening. In other areas might remain elusive. That's yet to be seen. But if you look at the success of DARPA and think about how back when that was started in the 60s, the things that we have today, for example, that are so ubiquitous, like the internet or GPS, that we didn't even have those ideas yet conceived. And so what the future has to hold for cancer, who knows? It's beyond our imaginations today.
And what should we know about your VC firm, what you're working on?
Well, that I back oncology focused startups. And so I'm interested in early stage companies that are seeking basically pre-seed or seed stage funding and occasionally Series A. And these could be companies that are involved in devices, diagnostics, therapeutics, or digital health. And the goal would be of these companies that they're looking to improve the lives of cancer patients, survivors, caretakers, or healthcare providers that treat these patients.
Great. Ashley, some closing thoughts?
There's so many different ways we could take this. I think from my standpoint, it's really exciting how cancer genetics has really evolved in the past 10 years and focused more on preventative medicine, screening if you know there's a genetic mutation, which ultimately saves people's lives. So when you ask the question about, will cancer be cured? I think there's always going to be genetic risk, but the hope is someday that gene therapy will play more of a role. And for genes that we haven't discovered yet, that really expands, especially due to next generation sequencing and the ability to be able to look at genes for such a lower cost than it used to be. Just to put things into perspective, a single gene, 10, 12 years ago used to cost about $4,000 per gene. And now we're able to test hundreds of genes for about $250. So that really makes testing more accessible to more patients, to more companies. And that is exciting.
Very much so. And Prentice, kind of to close us out here, since you graduated from Harvard Med School, what's changed? What's new?
I graduated generations ago, Mark. So much has changed, it'd be hard to get into it. I actually just want to thank Ashley and Robyn for their time and their expertise. I think we're entering an era of new treatments and modalities that are going to create a lot more optimism and hope around so many of these cancers. And so I just want to thank them for their efforts and the work that they do and their expertise in helping relieve the people of this disease entity.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for your time and your expertise. Very interesting, kind of giving us an update about cancer, what's going on, the opportunities to find cures, as well as for investors to invest in this area. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure speaking with you.